The barn burns against the Texas night, flames licking the sky like the devil's own fingers. In the flickering light, a widow stands defiant, a Belgian Malinois at her side, both silhouetted by the inferno that was once their home. The dog's muscles coil, ready for war. This isn't just arson, it's a declaration. They say the border changes people, turns lawmen into criminals, patriots into traitors, truth into whatever the highest bidder wants it to be. But they never counted on a woman with nothing left to lose, and a military-trained combat dog with the eyes of a killer and the heart of a guardian. Blood trails dry quickly in this heat, but vengeance has a longer memory. They came with fire, thinking they could burn away secrets buried in the Texas dust. Instead, they awakened something deadlier than any cartel hitman, a widow's rage and a soldier's promise. When loyalty is the last thing standing between justice and corruption, even the hunters become the hunted. The horizon was just beginning to blush with dawn's first light when Catherine Kate Harlo sensed something was wrong. She'd been up since 4:30 a.m., a habit from her military nursing days that civilian life hadn't broken. The cattle were too quiet. The birds weren't singing their usual morning chorus. Something had disturbed the natural rhythm of her Texas border ranch. "What is it, boy?" she whispered to Shadow, the Belgian Malinois at her side. The dog's ears were erect, his muscular body tense as a coiled spring. Kate instinctively reached for the Glock 19 holstered at her hip, another habit military life had instilled that she'd never abandoned, especially not since David's death. Shadow's low growl confirmed her suspicions. They weren't alone. Kate scanned the perimeter of the barn with practiced precision. The dog's head turned slightly north, toward the dry creek bed that marked the property's border. Moving with deliberate silence, Kate signaled Shadow to heel as they approached the disturbed area. Fresh boot prints in the soft morning earth told a story at least two men had crossed onto her land within the last hour. Shadow suddenly stiffened, his focus locked on a dense thicket of mesquite about 50 yards ahead. Kate dropped into a crouch, hand raised in the silent command for Shadow to stay. The command was unnecessary. The dog was already frozen in position, waiting. The attack came with little warning, just the slight rustle of brush before two men burst from cover. The first lunged at Kate with a hunting knife, while the second circled toward Shadow. "Take him!" Kate shouted, releasing Shadow from his command. The dog launched like a missile, a blur of tan fur and lethal purpose. Shadow hit the second man mid-stride, powerful jaws clamping down on the attacker's forearm with precision that shattered bone. Kate had no time to watch. The first attacker slashed wildly, forcing her to backstep. He was young, perhaps early 20s, with a cartel tattoo visible at his neck. Kate deflected his neck strike with her left forearm, then countered with a sharp right cross that connected with his jaw. The impact sent pain radiating through her knuckles, but her attacker stumbled backward. "You picked the wrong property," Kate growled, advancing with the controlled aggression David had taught her during their years together. The man spat blood and switched the knife to his other hand. "This is just a warning, puta," he snarled in heavily accented English. "Sell the land or burn with it." He lunged again, but this time Kate was ready. She sidestepped him, caught his extended arm, and used his momentum to drive him face first into the ground. A swift kick separated him from his knife, and she planted her boot firmly on his spine, gun now aimed at the back of his head. Nearby, Shadow's assailant was scrambling away, his mangled arm held close to his chest, face pale with shock and pain. The dog stood guard, waiting for Kate's command, blood staining his muzzle. "Who sent you?" Kate demanded, pressing the gun barrel against her captive's skull. "You know who," the man spat, defiant despite his position. "The land belongs to El Cuchillo now. We will return, and there will be more of us." Shadow's bark alerted Kate to movement behind her. The second attacker had recovered enough to pull a pistol with his good hand. Kate rolled sideways as the shot cracked through the morning air, missing her by inches. She returned fire, striking him in the shoulder. He stumbled but managed to drag her captive to his feet, and both men retreated into the brush, leaving a trail of blood. "Stay away," Kate commanded Shadow. who was poised to pursue. The dog complied, though every muscle in his body trembled with the desire to give chase. Kate surveyed the scattered evidence of the encounter: blood on the ground, a dropped knife, and a small packet of white powder that had fallen from one of the men's pockets. This wasn't a random attack. This was business. "Come on, boy, she said quietly to Shadow. "We need to secure the perimeter." As they walked back toward the ranch house, Kate's mind churned with implications. El Cuchillo, the knife, was a name she'd heard whispered in town, the local head of the Nuevo Laredo Cartel's border operations. Until now, they'd left her alone. Something had changed. She looked down at Shadow, who had returned to his usual alert but calm demeanor, despite the blood still staining his muzzle. The bond between them went beyond that of owner and pet. Shadow had been David's partner in Afghanistan, a specially trained combat dog who had saved her husband's life more times than she could count. When David was reported killed in action 2 years ago, the military had allowed Shadow to retire and come home to her, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless time. "You did good, boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears as they walked. David would be proud. The ranch house came into view, a sturdy, single-story structure that had been in David's family for 3 generations. Morning sunlight glinted off the metal roof, giving it a golden glow that belied the darkness of Kate's thoughts. This land was all she had left of David. Besides Shadow, she would die before she let anyone take it from her. The next night, Kate sat on her porch with a mug of coffee gone cold and a shotgun across her lap. Shadow lay at her feet, his head on his paws but his eyes alert, scanning the darkness beyond the circle of light cast by the porch lamp. Sleep had been elusive since the morning's confrontation. She'd reported the incident to the local sheriff's department, but Deputy Wilson had seemed more annoyed than concerned, taking minimal notes and suggesting that border trouble was to be expected in these parts. The implication was clear. She was on her own. It was nearly midnight when Shadow's head lifted, his attention fixed on the distant entrance to the ranch. Kate followed his gaze and spotted what had alerted him: headlights approaching along the dirt road, moving slowly with a deliberate caution that set alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Position," she whispered to Shadow, using one of the tactical commands David had taught the dog. Without hesitation, Shadow slipped off the porch and disappeared into the shadows, moving toward a predetermined defensive position that would allow him to flank any intruders. Kate moved inside, switched off all lights, and positioned herself at a window with a clear view of the approaching vehicles. 2 black SUVs with their headlights dimmed to mere slits were crawling toward the horse stables. Through her binoculars, she counted 4 men, all armed. "Not this time," she muttered. Grabbing her shotgun and her phone, she dialed 911 but hesitated before pressing call. The response time from town would be 20 minutes at best, and that was assuming they took her seriously. These men would be gone by then, or she would be. She set the phone down and moved silently through the house to the back door. Years of living on the ranch had taught her every creak in the floorboards, every shadow to avoid. Outside, she circled wide, keeping the barn between herself and the intruders as she made her way toward the stable. The men had parked and were now approaching the wooden structure with clear purpose. One carried what looked like a gasoline can. Kate's blood ran cold. They weren't here to steal. They were here to burn. She positioned herself behind an old tractor and raised the shotgun. "This is private property," she called out, her voice steady and authoritative. "I'm armed, and I've called the police." The men froze, then scattered for cover. One raised a pistol and fired wildly in her direction. Kate returned fire, the shotgun's blast echoing across the property. She saw one of the men stumble, clutching his leg where the spray of buckshot had found its mark. "Next one goes center mass," Kate warned, chambering another round with a deliberate pump action that carried clearly in the night air. The wounded man was dragged to cover by his companions, who began a strategic retreat toward their vehicles, laying down covering fire as they withdrew. Kate held her position, firing again when one man made a dash with the gasoline can still in hand. The shot went wide, but the man dropped the can and fled. As the SUVs peeled away in a cloud of dust, Kate noticed Shadow emerging from the darkness. Something clutched in his powerful jaws. The dog trotted to her side and dropped his prize at her feet, a messenger bag that one of the fleeing men had abandoned. Inside, Kate found stacks of cash bound with rubber bands and several packages of white powder, similar to what she'd found that morning. There was also a smartphone and a small notebook with coordinates written in precise handwriting. "Good boy," she whispered to Shadow, whose tail swept once in acknowledgement. "These guys aren't just cartel thugs. This is organized, professional." Kate secured the ranch house for the night, double-checking every window and door before finally allowing herself to sit at the kitchen table and examine the contents of the bag more thoroughly. The phone was locked, but the notebook contained what appeared to be drop locations coordinates along with dates and times. Her ranch was clearly marked as a transit point. Shadow settled at her feet with a soft whine. Sensing her distress, Kate reached down to stroke his fur, finding comfort in his solid presence. "I know, boy," she murmured. "I miss him too." David's absence was a physical ache that never quite subsided. A Navy SEAL with 15 years of service. He'd been deployed to Afghanistan for what should have been his final tour. The official report stated that his team had been ambushed while on a classified operation. David and two others were listed as killed in action, though his body had never been recovered, a fact that had made closure nearly impossible for Kate. Now, staring at evidence of cartel activity on her land, she couldn't help but wonder what David would do in her position. Fight, probably. He'd never been one to back down from a threat, but he'd also been strategic, calculating risks with the precision of a man who knew that one wrong move meant death. "We need to be smart about this," she told Shadow, who watched her with intelligent eyes that sometimes seemed to understand every word. "We can't take on a cartel alone." But as she looked at the phone and notebook on her table, concrete evidence that might mean nothing to the disinterested local authorities, Kate knew that alone was exactly what they were. Shabbat. The next morning, Kate drove into the small border town of Rio Seco, Shadow riding shotgun with his head out the window. The town had seen better days. Many storefronts along Main Street were vacant, their windows dusty or boarded over. Those businesses that remained open catered primarily to the ranchers and farmers in the surrounding county, with a few tourist traps thrown in for the occasional visitor heading to or from Mexico. Kate parked in front of Mason's General Store, one of the few establishments that had been in continuous operation since before she moved to the area with David. Old Man Mason had been a friend to them both, one of the few locals who hadn't viewed them with suspicion when they first arrived, a military couple from up north, settling in border country. "Wait here," she told Shadow, cracking the windows before locking the truck. The dog settled in the passenger seat, his vigilant gaze following her movement. Inside the store, Kate collected the supplies she needed: fence repair materials, ammunition, and groceries. As she browsed, she overheard snippets of conversation between Mason and another customer at the counter. "Offering top dollar for land and all along that stretch," the man was saying. "Turner Development's got big plans, from what I hear." "Resort and golf course," Mason replied with his snort. "Who's going to drive all the way out here to play golf? Whole thing stinks of money laundering if you ask me." Kate paused, her attention caught by the mention of development. She moved casually closer, selecting a bow of 12-gauge shells from a nearby shelf. "Morning, Kate," Mason called, noticing her approach. "Heard you had some trouble out at your place yesterday. You okay?" News traveled fast in Rio Seco. "I'm fine," Kate replied, placing her items on the counter. "Just some trespassers. Nothing Shadow and I couldn't handle." The other customer, Brad Reynolds, she now recognized. A local real estate agent gave her an appraising look. "You know, Mrs. Harlo, if managing that big ranch is becoming too much, I have clients who would pay very well for property in your area." Kate met his gaze coolly. "The ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Reynolds. Even the most stubborn sellers have their price," Reynolds replied with a thin smile, "especially when holding on becomes difficult." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down Kate's spine. "If you change your mind, give me a call." He placed a business card on the counter before nodding to Mason and exiting the store. Mason waited until the door closed behind Reynolds before speaking. That man's been sniffing around every property from here to the border. Working with some outfit called Turner Development. Real pushy. What do you know about them? Kate asked, watching through the window as Reynolds climbed into a sleek Cadillac Escalade that seemed out of place among the dusty trucks that typically populated Rio Seco. California money, Mason replied with the disdain locals reserve for outsiders. Started buying up foreclosures last year. Now they're after prime ranch land. Offering crazy money too. He gave Kate a meaningful look. But you be careful. Some folks who've refused to sell have had accidents. Kate thought of the men at her stable the night before. Like fires. Mason nodded grimly. Among other things. Armed with this new context, Kate completed her shopping and returned to her truck. Shadow greeted her with a soft whine, but his attention was fixed across the street where three men were leaning against a parked pickup, watching her with unconcealed interest. Kate recognized one of them as the man who had escaped with a wounded arm the previous morning. The other two were strangers, but their hard expressions and the visible outline of weapons beneath their jackets marked them as cartel muscle. Just can't take a hint, can you? Kate muttered, placing her purchases in the truck bed before climbing into the driver's seat. She started the engine but didn't immediately drive away, instead meeting the stare of the man she had encountered. His arm was in a sling, but his face showed no pain, only cold determination. One of the other men made a gesture with his hand, thumb across throat. A promise where Kate pulled away from the curb, her mind working through scenarios. The cartel wanted her land or at least use of it. This Turner Development was buying up properties in the area, offering crazy money according to Mason. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. She took a detour on the way home, driving past the sheriff's office with the intention of reporting both the night's attempted arson and the implied threat she'd just received. But as she approached, she saw Reynolds' Escalade parked in the lot, and through the window, she could make out the real estate agent in what appeared to be a friendly conversation with Sheriff Bill Hawkins. Kate drove on without stopping. If Reynolds was connected to the cartel, and he was on friendly terms with Hawkins. Looks like we really are on our own. Shadow, she said, glancing at the Kate who sat alert in the passenger seat. Just like old times for you, huh? Shadow's ears perked at her voice, his intelligent eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to scan the road ahead. The dog had been through war zones with David, trained to detect explosives, track targets, and attack on command. He was more than a pet. He was a soldier who had simply transferred his loyalty to her after David's death. As they turned onto the dirt road leading to the ranch, Kate noticed a rental car parked near her gate, a nondescript sedan with a single occupant who appeared to be consulting a map. She slowed, suspicion immediately rising. The man looked up as she approached, then stepped out of his vehicle and raised both hands in a gesture of peace. He was Latino, mid-30s, with the lean build and watchful eyes of someone who lived in a perpetual state of alertness. Kate stopped her truck but didn't get out, her hand resting near the Glock at her hip. Shadow was rigid with tension beside her, a low growl building in his chest. "Mrs. Harlo," the man called. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to speak with you. It's important." "Who are you?" Kate demanded through her open window, keeping the engine running. "My name is Diego Vasquez," he replied, his accent placing him as a native Spanish speaker who had learned English young. "I have information about the men who've been threatening you." Kate studied him warily. "Let me see some ID." Diego reached slowly into his pocket and produced a wallet, which he opened to reveal some form of identification. He held it up, but they were too far apart for Kate to make out the details. "I'd rather not shout the nature of my work," Diego said, glancing around. "May I approach?" Kate hesitated, then gave a sharp command to Shadow. "Guard!" The dog immediately tensed, ready to launch through the open window at the first sign of threat. To Diego, she called, "Slowly, keep your hands where I can see them." Diego approached with careful steps, hands held slightly away from his body. When he was close enough, he presented his ID, a badge identifying him as an agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration. "You're a long way from any DEA office." Kate observed, not yet ready to trust the badge. What's your interest in my ranch? Not here, Diego. Diego replied, his voice dropping. You have people watching you. We need to talk somewhere private. Kate's instinct was to refuse, but something in the man's eyes, an urgency tinged with genuine concern, made her reconsider. She gestured to the passenger side. Get in. My dog stays between us. Diego nodded and circled the truck. Shadow shifted to the middle of the bench seat, his body still tense, eyes never leaving the stranger as he climbed in. Kate drove through the gate to her property, stopping once they were out of sight of the road. She turned to face Diego, one hand still near her weapon. Start talking. I've been working undercover in the Nuevo Laredo cartel for 14 months. Diego explained without preamble. Specifically, I've been investigating their connection to a development company. Turner Development. Kate supplied. Diego nodded, impressed. You've done your homework. Yes. Turner Development is a front for money laundering and trafficking operations. They buy strategic properties along the border to create a corridor for moving product north and cash south. And they want my ranch. Your ranch sits at a critical juncture. There's a dry riverbed that runs through your property that provides perfect cover for vehicles. The surrounding terrain makes aerial surveillance difficult. It's ideal for their purposes. Diego paused. But that's not the only reason they want you out. Kate waited, sensing there was more. Your husband was David Harlo, correct, Navy SEAL? The question sent a jolt through Kate. What does David have to do with this? Diego's expression was grave. Before his final deployment, your husband was part of a joint task force investigating military-grade weapons being smuggled into Mexico. He identified several key players, including some within U.S. law enforcement. The implications hit Kate like a physical blow. Are you saying David's death wasn't... I don't know, Diego interrupted. That's beyond the scope of my investigation. But I do know that when Turner Development realized who owned this ranch, they became particularly interested in acquiring it. His eyes met hers. They're afraid of what your husband might have told you. Shadow whined softly, perhaps sensing Kate's distress. She placed a steadying hand on the dog's back, trying to process this new information. David had never discussed his work in detail, couldn't, given the classified nature of many of his operations. But in the weeks before his final deployment, he had been unusually tense, spending long hours on secure calls. I don't know anything about weapons smuggling, Kate said finally. David kept his work separate from our home life. They don't know that, Diego replied. And they're not the type to take chances. He glanced at his watch. I need to go. I've been away too long already. But you need to be careful. Mrs. Harlo, these people, I can handle myself, Kate interrupted, steel entering her voice. And I'm not selling my ranch. Diego studied her for a moment, then nodded. I believe you can, but you should know what you're up against. The local sheriff is on their payroll. So are several Border Patrol agents. If you need to reach me, he handed her a business card with only a phone number written on it. Use this number. One text, no names. I'll find you. As Kate drove Diego back to his rental car, she felt the ground shifting beneath her. What had seemed like a local land dispute was apparently connected to international drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and possibly even David's death. The stakes had risen exponentially. Be careful, Mrs. Harlo, Diego said as he exited the truck. They'll be watching you now more than ever. With those ominous words, he drove away, leaving Kate and Shadow alone at the gate to their increasingly dangerous sanctuary. 3 days passed without incident, but Kate didn't allow herself to relax. She patrolled the perimeter of her property twice daily, Shadow always at her side. She reinforced doors, installed additional outdoor lighting, and kept her weapons within easy reach at all times. The quiet made her more nervous, not less. It suggested planning a gathering storm rather than a dissipated threat. On the 4th day, Kate drove into town for necessary supplies, unwilling to alter her routine despite the danger. Shadow accompanied her as always, a constant guardian whose presence had taken on new significance since Diego's revelations. The trip to the general store was uneventful, but as Kate loaded her purchases into the truck, she noticed three men watching her from across the street. They made no attempt to hide their surveillance, their postures radiating menace even from a distance. "Not here," Kate murmured to Shadow, who had tensed beside her, sensing the threat. "Too public." She drove away with deliberate calm, but instead of taking the direct road home, she circled through town, confirming her suspicion when a black SUV pulled out to follow her. Kate led them through several turns, then accelerated onto a side street, hoping to lose them before reaching the open highway that led to her ranch. The plan backfired. As she rounded a corner into a narrow alley that would connect to a parallel street, a second SUV appeared ahead, blocking her path. The first vehicle pulled his behind, trapping her. "Damn it," Kate muttered, quickly assessing options as men emerged from both vehicles. 6 in total, all armed. Shadow growled low into his throat, sensing the imminent confrontation. Kate reached for her Glock, but before she could draw, one of the men approached her window, hands conspicuously empty. "Mrs. Harlo," he said in accented English, his tone surprisingly cordial. "Please, a moment of your time." Kate kept her hand near her weapon but didn't draw. "Say what you have to say. My employer wishes to make you a generous offer for your property," the man continued, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Twice its market value, paid in cash. You could start a new life anywhere you choose." "Not interested," Kate replied flatly. "Now move your vehicles. You're blocking a public road." The man's smile faded. "I don't think you understand the situation, Mrs. Harlo. This is not a request that can be refused." He nodded to his companions, who began to approach from both sides of the truck. Kate drew her weapon. "Close enough." The men hesitated, their hands moving toward concealed firearms. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge, 6 against 1 in a confined space. Even with her military training and Shadow's assistance, the odds were dangerously against her. "You can't win this fight," the spokesman said, his voice hardening. "Be reasonable." Kate met his gaze unflinchingly. "I don't need to win. I just need to ensure that whatever happens to me happens to your boss's representative too." She aimed directly at the man's chest. "How valuable are you to El Cuchillo?" Uncertainty flickered across the man's face. He hadn't expected this level of resistance from a lone woman, nor her knowledge of his employer's identity. The hesitation was all Kate needed. "Shadow, break," she commanded. The dog, who had been waiting with coiled tension, exploded into action. With powerful legs, he launched himself through the partially open window on the passenger side, directly at the nearest gunman. The sudden attack created instant chaos. Shadow's jaws clamped around the man's gun arm with crushing force, eliciting a scream of pain and causing the weapon to clatter to the ground. Kate seized the moment of confusion to slam her truck into reverse, crashing into the SUV behind her with enough force to create a gap. She shifted to drive and floored the accelerator, sideswiping the spokesman, who leaped out of the way a split second before impact. "Shadow, return," she shouted as she maneuvered the truck toward the narrow space now available between the damaged SUV and the alley wall. With battlefield precision, Shadow released his victim and sprinted toward the moving truck, leaping through the open window as Kate accelerated past the remaining gunman. Bullets pinged against the truck's metal body, one shattering the rear window, but then they were through and racing toward the highway. Kate checked the rearview mirror, seeing the SUV scrambling to pursue. "Good boy," she told Shadow, who sat alert beside her, blood staining his muzzle. "Now we run." Kate knew the county roads better than any outsider could. She took a series of turns onto progressively smaller dirt tracks, using the dust cloud behind her truck to obscure her final turn onto an old cattle path that ran behind her property. By the time she circled back to her ranch from the rear approach, there was no sign of pursuit. She parked the truck behind the barn and quickly led Shadow into the house, retrieving her first aid kit to check the dog for injuries. Finding only minor cuts from his leap through the window, Kate cleaned them carefully before examining her own scrapes and bruises from the collision. That was too close. she told Shadow, who watched her with unwavering attention. We need to be ready for what comes next. The confrontation in town had escalated the situation beyond threats. The cartel had shown its hand, attempting to forcibly remove her from the equation when persuasion failed. Their next move would be more direct, more violent. Kate moved methodically through the house, checking her defensive preparations. She inventoried ammunition, confirmed that backup weapons were accessible at key locations, and reviewed potential escape routes. This had become a siege, and she needed to think like a soldier under fire rather than a widow defending her home. As darkness fell, Kate positioned herself at an upstairs window with a clear view of the approach to the ranch. Shadow lay beside her as both of them still and watchful in the gathering gloom. The weight of David's dog tags pressed against her chest beneath her shirt, a talisman of sorts that she'd taken to wearing since the threats began. I wish you were here, she whispered, thinking of her husband. David would have known exactly how to handle this situation, how to outthink and outmaneuver their adversaries. All Kate had were the fragments of tactical knowledge she'd absorbed from him over the years and her own stubborn determination not to be driven from the home they had shared. Shadow's ears suddenly pricked forward, his body tensing. A moment later, Kate heard it too, the distant sound of approaching vehicles. Not from the main road this time, but across the open range to the south. Through her binoculars, she spotted headlights bouncing across the uneven terrain, following a seldom-used track that skirted her property line. 3 vehicles moving with their lights dimmed, advancing with clear purpose toward the most vulnerable section of her perimeter. So it begins, Kate murmured, checking her weapon one final time before moving to a pre-planned defensive position. Shadow followed, his movements as silent as shadows in the darkened house. The first shot came without warning, shattering the front window and embedding itself in the wall opposite. It was followed immediately by a barrage of gunfire that peppered the ranch house with methodical precision. Kate kept low, counting shooters by their positions and rate of fire. At least 8, maybe more, spread in a semicircle around the front of the house. They were attempting to pin her down while others approached from the sides. Through a gap in the curtains, she saw dark figures moving toward the barn and adjoining stable. One carried what looked like a container of gasoline or accelerant. Not the horses, Kate whispered. A cold rage replacing fear. She had 4-quarter horses in that stable, animals that David had bred and trained, living legacies of his passion for ranching. Shadow, position 2, she commanded, and the dog immediately moved to a secondary location. They had practiced a hidden spot with access to the rear exit of the house. Kate fired several covering shots through the shattered window, forcing the advancing figures to take cover, then quickly moved to join Shadow at the back door. Years of living on the ranch had taught her every approach, every blind spot. There was a drainage ditch that ran behind the house toward the stable shallow cover, but better than none. Ready, she asked Shadow, who stood poised at the door, every muscle tense with anticipation. The dog's eyes met hers, a silent communication born of complete trust. Let's go. Kate threw open the door and they sprinted for the ditch, diving into its shallow depression as bullets kicked up dirt around them. Using the ditch for cover, they crawled rapidly toward the stable, the sounds of gunfire providing auditory cover for their movement. From their new position, Kate could see 3 men approaching the stable, one now unscrewing the cap on a container of accelerant. They were focused on their task, unaware of her flanking maneuver. Shadow, take, she whispered, pointing to the man with the gasoline can. Like a missile locked on target, Shadow burst from the ditch and crossed the open ground in seconds. The men had no warning before the dog slammed into his designated target, powerful jaws clamping around the man's arm. The gasoline can went flying, spilling its contents harmlessly onto the ground. Kate emerged firing, dropping one man with a shot to the leg before the third could bring his weapon to bear. He managed to get off a wild shot that went wide before Kate's second bullet found his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Shadow, release and guard, Kate commanded, approaching the downed men with her weapon trained on the most threatening of the 3, the one Shadow had attacked, who still had a sidearm holstered at his hip. Shadow obeyed instantly. releasing his hold but maintaining a threatening stance, teeth bared and ready to attack if the man made any sudden moves. "Tell your friends to back off," Kate ordered the man, who clutched his savaged arm, face contorted with pain and rage. "Or the next one goes through your head. You're dead anyway," the man spat back in Spanish. "El cuchillo doesn't forget." The sound of approaching footsteps alerted Kate to new danger, more men drawn by the gunfire, converging on her position. She was outnumbered and exposed, her momentary advantage evaporating. "Shadow, retreat," she called, firing several covering shots before running for the small equipment shed 20 yards away. Shadow bolted ahead of her, reaching the shed first and disappearing inside. Kate made it to the shed seconds before bullets splintered the wooden door behind her. Inside, she quickly barricaded the entrance with a heavy workbench, then assessed her situation. The shed had no rear exit, but there was a small window high on the back wall that might provide an escape route. "Up," she commanded Shadow, pointing to a stack of crates beneath the window. The dog immediately understood, leaping nimbly up the makeshift stairs and positioning himself at the window, waiting for her next command. Outside, men shouted to each other in Spanish, coordinating their approach to the shed. Kate could make out orders to surround the building and prepare to burn it. Her time was running out. With swift efficiency, she reloaded her weapon and searched the shed for anything useful. Her eyes fell on a rack of tools along one wall and among them, a can of wasp spray with a range of 20 feet. Not ideal, but it would have to do. "Go," she told Shadow, who immediately squeezed through the window and disappeared from view. Kate waited, counting under her breath until she reached 30, enough time for Shadow to circle to his designated position based on their training. Then she moved to the window herself, wasp spray in her left hand, gun in her right. The opening was tight, but Kate managed to wriggle through, dropping silently to the ground outside. She was now behind the shed, temporarily hidden from the men who were focusing on the barricaded front entrance. A sharp whistle, barely audible but unmistakable to Kate's trained ear, signaled Shadow's position. The dog had circled around and located a blind spot in the cartel's perimeter. Kate moved toward the sound, staying low and using the darkness as cover. She found Shadow waiting beside the irrigation equipment that serviced her eastern pasture. Beyond it lay an open country, their best chance for escape from the surrounded ranch house. "Good boy," she whispered, patting the dog's head. "Let's—" The sound of a shotgun being racked froze Kate mid-sentence. She turned slowly to find Sheriff Bill Hawkins standing 10 feet away, his weapon aimed squarely at her chest. "Evening, Mrs. Harlo," Hawkins said, his tone conversational, despite the circumstances. "Seems you've got yourself in quite a situation here." Kate kept her own weapon lowered but ready. "Funny time for law enforcement to finally show up, Sheriff," Hawkins smiled thinly. "Oh, I'm not here officially. Let's call this a personal visit. Concerned citizen checking on a neighbor." "With friends?" Kate asked, nodding toward the men still surrounding her property. "Associates," Hawkins corrected. "Who have a business proposition you have been rudely refusing." He gestured with the shotgun. "Now, I'm going to make this simple. You're going to sign over your property to Turner Development tonight, and in exchange, you get to walk away with your life and that fancy war dog of yours." Kate weighed her options. Hawkins was too far away for her to rush him before he could fire, and Shadow, while trained to attack armed threats, would likely be shot before reaching the sheriff. "And if I refuse," she asked, playing for time as she surveyed their surroundings for any advantage, "then we burn everything to the ground and call it a tragic accident." Hawkins replied with chilling casualness. "Wouldn't be the first widow to die alone out here on the border. Dangerous place, after all." The sheriff's confidence told Kate everything she needed to know about his involvement with the cartel. This wasn't a reluctant lawman caught in circumstances beyond his control. This was a willing participant in their operation. "You knew my husband," Kate said, a new edge in her voice. "He trusted you." Something flickered across Hawkins' face, not quite regret, but recognition. "David was a good man, too good for his own good. Turns out," Should have minded his own business. He gestured again with the shotgun. Don't make his mistake. Mrs. Harlo, some fights can't be won. Before Kate could respond, the night erupted in chaos. A massive explosion rocked the barn, sending a fireball into the sky and momentarily distracting everyone. In that split second of confusion, Shadow acted without command, launching himself at Hawkins with silent, lethal intent. The sheriff managed to fire one wild shot before the dog crashed into him, powerful jaws locking around his gun arm. Kate seized the opportunity, rushing forward to kick the shotgun away before leveling her pistol at Hawkins' head. "Call them off," she demanded, pressing the barrel against his temple. "Now!" Hawkins, pinned beneath Shadow's weight and in obvious pain from the dog's crushing bite, nevertheless managed a defiant glare. "You think this changes anything? You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." The explosion had drawn the attention of the cartel men, who were now regrouping, trying to locate Kate and the sheriff in the confusion. She had seconds at most before they converged on her position. "Shadow, release," Kate commanded, pulling the dazed sheriff to his feet and using him as a shield as she backed toward the cover of the irrigation equipment. "You're coming with us, Sheriff." Insurance policy. With Hawkins as an unwilling hostage and Shadow guarding their rear, Kate made a strategic retreat toward the eastern perimeter of her property. The cartel forces, momentarily disorganized by the explosion and unwilling to risk hitting the sheriff, maintained distance but continued to pursue. They reached the property line, a barbed wire fence separating Kate's ranch from state land beyond. She forced Hawkins to the ground, keeping her weapon trained on him. "Shadow, advance," she ordered, and the dog slipped through the fence to secure their escape route. "You won't get far," Hawkins said, blood trickling from where Shadow had mauled his arm. "They control everything within 100 miles of here." "We'll see about that," Kate replied, tearing a strip from Hawkins' shirt to bind his hands. "Meanwhile, you get to explain to your cartel friends why you failed. I hear El Cuchillo isn't very forgiving of failure." Fear finally broke through the sheriff's bravado. "You can't leave me here. They'll kill me." "Should have thought of that before you decided to burn down my ranch," Kate said coldly. She secured the makeshift restraints, then used the sheriff's own handcuffs to lock him to the fence post. "Someone will find you eventually." As she slipped through the fence to join the Shadow on the other side, Hawkins called after her. "This isn't over. Harlo, you hear me? We know about your husband's files. We know what he hid." Kate paused, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "What files?" But she had no time for answers. The cartel men had spotted them and were approaching rapidly. With a final glance at her burning barn at the home she had shared with David now under siege, Kate turned and ran into the darkness. Shadow at her side. Behind them, flames consumed the structures of Harlo Ranch, casting an orange glow against the night sky that was visible for miles across the flat Texas landscape. But even as her present burned, Kate's mind was alight with a new revelation. Files. David had hidden files. And if the cartel was willing to burn her out to find them, they must contain something worth killing for. As she and Shadow disappeared into the night, one thought crystallized in Kate's mind. With diamond clarity, this wasn't just about defending her home anymore. This was about uncovering the truth behind David's death, a truth that powerful people had killed to keep buried. The hunt had begun. But Kate Harlo was no longer the hunted. With Shadow by her side and the sheriff's inadvertent revelation echoing in her mind, she had become the hunter. The motel room was sparse and anonymous, its faded floral wallpaper and threadbare carpet identical to countless others along America's highways. Kate sat on the edge of the bed, cleaning her Glock with methodical precision while Shadow maintained watch at the window, his vigilant gaze tracking the occasional car that passed through the parking lot. 3 days had passed since they'd fled the burning ranch. 3 days of constant movement, staying off main roads, paying cash for everything, and sleeping in the truck when necessary. Kate had dyed her chestnut hair a nondescript brown in a gas station bathroom and purchased clothes from a thrift store that wouldn't draw attention: jeans, flannel shirts, and a worn leather jacket that helped her blend into the rural landscape. "What files, David?" she whispered to herself, reassembling her weapon with practiced hands. "What did you find?" Shadow's ears perked up, his head turning toward her at the sound of his former master's name. Kate reached out to scratch behind the dog's ears, finding comfort in his solid presence. "We need help, boy," she admitted. "Someone who knew David. Someone we can trust." The list of potential allies was dangerously short. Most of David's SEAL teammates were either still deployed overseas or scattered across the country. Local law enforcement was compromised, as Sheriff Hawkins had made painfully clear. Family was out of the question. Kate's parents were deceased, and David's elderly mother in Minnesota was in no position to become involved in a dangerous conflict with a drug cartel. There was one name that kept surfacing in her thoughts: Michael Callahan. David's former team leader had retired from the SEALs 2 years before David's final deployment and now served as sheriff in Terrell County, about 100 miles northwest of Rio Seco. David had spoken of him with respect, describing Callahan as the kind of man you want beside you when the world goes to hell. The world had definitely gone to hell. Kate needed someone beside her. She pulled out a burner phone purchased at a truck stop and dialed the Terrell County Sheriff's Department, asking for Sheriff Callahan. After a brief hold, a deep voice answered. "Callahan, Sheriff, my name is Catherine Harlo. I'm David Harlo's widow." A pause, then "Mrs. Harlo, I heard about the fire at your ranch. Are you all right?" "Not exactly," Kate replied, choosing her words carefully. "I need to speak with you, in person. It's about David, and some trouble I'm in." Another pause. Longer this time. "Does this have anything to do with the APB Sheriff Hawkins put out on you claims you assaulted him and fled the scene of a crime?" Kate's grip tightened on the phone. "It has everything to do with that. Sheriff Hawkins is working with the people who burned down my ranch." "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Harlo." "I can prove it, but not over the phone." Callahan sighed, a sound weighted with consideration. "All right. There's a diner called Ruby's just outside Sanderson. I can meet you there tomorrow morning at 8. Come alone." "I'll have my dog with me," Kate said. He was David's. "The military working dog?" Callahan asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I remember him. Shadow. Right, bring him. I'll see you at 8. The line went dead, leaving Kate with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Callahan had agreed to meet, but his tone had been guarded. She couldn't be certain of his allegiance until they spoke face to face. "Get some rest," she told Shadow, who had returned to his vigilant post by the window. "Tomorrow we find out who's still on our side." Ruby's Diner was a chrome-trimmed relic of the 1950s, set back from the highway behind a gravel parking lot populated mainly by dusty pickup trucks. Kate arrived 30 minutes early, parking the truck where she could observe all approaches to the building. Shadow sat beside her, his attention divided between the diner and Kate's face, reading her tension. "We're exposed here," she murmured, scanning the sparse morning traffic on the highway. After days of hiding, sitting in plain view felt like standing naked in a sniper's crosshairs. At precisely 8 o'clock, a Terrell County Sheriff's Department SUV pulled into the lot and parked. A tall man in uniform emerged broad-shouldered with close-cropped gray hair and the measured movements of someone accustomed to weighing threats. He paused, surveying the lot before his gaze settled on Kate's truck. "That's our cue," Kate told Shadow, clipping a leash to his collar as a formality. The dog didn't need physical restraint. He responded instantly to verbal commands, but the leash would make their presence in the diner less alarming to the other patrons. Sheriff Mike Callahan watched their approach with an inscrutable expression. Up close, Kate could see the resemblance to the man in photos David had shown, her the same square jaw and watchful eyes, though time had etched deeper lines around his mouth and across his forehead. "Mrs. Harlo," he greeted her with a nod, his gaze dropping to Shadow. Something like recognition passed between the man and dog. "He looks good." David would be pleased. The simple acknowledgement loosened something in Kate's chest. "Thank you for meeting us, Sheriff." "Mike," he corrected, holding the diner door open. "Let's get some coffee and talk." Inside, Callahan led them to a corner booth with clear sight lines to both the entrance and the kitchen. A waitress approached, her eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Shadow, but Callahan's badge forestalled any objections. "Just coffee for now. Ruby?" he told her. "And maybe some water for the dog." When Ruby had delivered their coffee and retreated, Callahan leaned forward, his voice low. "I made some calls after you contacted me. There's a lot of unusual activity around Rio Seco. Border Patrol reports being told to avoid certain areas on specific nights. DEA has a task force operating there, but won't share details with local law enforcement. And Sheriff Hawkins has been making noise about a dangerous fugitive who assaulted an officer and has connections to drug runners." His eyes met Kate's directly. "Want to tell me your side?" Kate took a deep breath and laid out the events of the past week, the initial threats, Diego's warnings about Turner Development's connection to the cartel, the attack on her ranch, and Hawkins' direct involvement. She described the sheriff's thinly veiled death threat and his cryptic mention of files that David had hidden. Callahan listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. When Kate finished, he remained silent for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles. "I knew Bill Hawkins in the Rangers," he finally said. "He was a good man once, or I thought he was." "People change," Kate replied, her tone hard, "especially when there's enough money involved." Callahan nodded. "The cartels have been getting smarter. They don't just bribe officials anymore. They compromise them, turn them step by step until suddenly they're in too deep to get out." He studied Kate's face. "But that's not why you came to me. You mentioned files that David had hidden." "I don't know anything about any files," Kate admitted. "This was the first I'd heard of them. But if Hawkins mentioned them while trying to force me off my land, they must be important." "David was investigating weapons smuggling before his last deployment," Callahan said quietly. "High-grade military equipment disappearing from bases and showing up in cartel hands. He suspected an inside operation involving military personnel and border officials." "He never told me that," Kate said, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. David had always kept his work compartmentalized, shielding her from the darker aspects of his missions. "He wouldn't have," Callahan agreed. "It was off-book, unofficial. He came to me about 6 months before he deployed, asked for my help tracking some shipments that had moved through my county, said he was collecting evidence but couldn't trust the usual channels." His expression darkened. "Then he was deployed, and 3 months later, we heard he'd been killed in action." "You think the two are connected," Kate said, the implication hitting her like a physical blow. "I think," Callahan replied carefully, "that you should consider the possibility that your husband found something dangerous enough that certain people would go to great lengths to keep it buried, including burning down a ranch to destroy evidence." Shadow suddenly tensed beside Kate, his attention fixing on the diner's entrance. Kate followed his gaze to see 2 men entering, both wearing casual clothes but moving with the deliberate awareness of law enforcement or military. Callahan noticed her shift in attention. "Friends of yours?" "Never seen them before," Kate murmured, her hand instinctively moving toward her concealed weapon. "Easy," Callahan cautioned. "Could be nothing." But as the men scanned the diner, their gazes settling on Kate's table with unmistakable recognition, nothing became an impossibility. "Police!" one of the men shouted, drawing a weapon. "Catherine Harlo, you're under arrest." The diner erupted in panic, patrons diving for cover as the men advanced. Shadow growled, his body coiling with protective tension. "Stay down," Callahan ordered Kate, rising to face the approaching men, his badge displayed prominently. "Gentlemen, I'm Sheriff Mike Callahan, Terrell County. This woman is under my protection while we sort out some jurisdictional issues." "With all due respect, Sheriff," the lead man replied, weapon still raised. "We have a federal warrant for Mrs. Harlo's arrest, suspicion of drug trafficking, and assault on a peace officer." "Federal," Callahan's eyebrows rose. "Which agency?" The men exchanged glances. "That's classified. Please step aside." "Sheriff?" Kate's blood ran cold. "No identification. No specific agency named these weren't federal agents. They were cartel enforcers using false credentials to get to her. Shadow, protect, she whispered. The command barely audible but immediately understood by the combat-trained dog. What happened next unfolded with the choreographed precision of a military operation. Shadow launched from a sitting position, clearing the table in a single bound and slamming into the lead man with enough force to send him crashing into a booth. The impact knocked his weapon free, skittering across the linoleum floor. Simultaneously, Callahan drew his service weapon with practiced speed, aiming at the second man. "Drop it," he ordered, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who would not ask twice. The second man hesitated, then complied, his weapon clattering to the floor. "This is interference with a federal investigation," he protested, though his tone lacked conviction. "Funny," Callahan replied. "I haven't seen a badge or warrant yet. Empty your pockets." Slowly. Kate had retrieved the first man's dropped weapon and now covered him as Shadow maintained a threatening stance, teeth bared inches from the man's throat. The diner had emptied of civilians, leaving only Ruby watching wide-eyed from behind the counter as Callahan methodically searched the men. From the second man's wallet, he extracted several identification cards, all with different names and agencies. "Interesting federal credentials you've got here," Callahan observed, examining the cards. "Especially since I personally know the DEA field director for this region, and he's definitely not named Rodriguez or Smith or Johnson." He pocketed the cards and pulled out his phone. "Let's see what the real feds have to say about you two." The first man, still pinned by Shadow's intimidating presence, abruptly changed tactics. "Look, we can work something out," he said, his accent slipping to reveal hints of his native Spanish. "There's money, a lot of money." "Are you attempting to bribe an officer of the law?" Callahan asked mildly, though his eyes had hardened to flint. "Not bribe," the man clarified quickly. "Compensate for your trouble. El Cuchillo is generous to his friends." Callahan's expression revealed nothing, but Kate felt a chill at the mention of the cartel leader's name. The sheriff finished dialing and put the phone to his ear. "Jim Mike Callahan. I've got 2 men in my custody claiming to be federal agents with warrants for Catherine Harlo. They've presented multiple false identification cards." He paused, listening. "That's what I thought. Can you send someone to take custody? I think your agency might find their connections interesting." Another pause. "Great, we'll be here." He ended the call and addressed the would-be kidnappers. "Real federal agents will be here in about 20 minutes. I suggest you get comfortable and consider what kind of deal you might want to make. The DEA has been looking to crack the Nuevo Laredo cartel for years." The men exchanged alarmed glances, but remained silent, apparently reassessing their options in light of this development. Callahan turned to Kate. "We need to move you somewhere secure until we figure this out. These two are just the advance team. There'll be others." Kate nodded, her mind already shifting to tactical considerations. "I have supplies in my truck, weapons, cash, food for Shadow." "Good, but we're taking my vehicle. Yours is probably being tracked." Callahan handcuffed the 2 men to the diner's bolted-down counter, leaving them under Ruby's armed supervision with instructions for the arriving federal agents. Outside, he led Kate and Shadow to his county SUV. "I have a hunting cabin about 40 miles from here, off-grid, defensible position. We'll go there and figure out our next move." As they pulled away from the diner, Kate watched the highway behind them for signs of pursuit. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You're risking your career. Maybe your life." Callahan's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, but his jaw tightened. "David Harlo saved my life in Kandahar. Twice. But more than that, he was the finest man I ever served with. If he was investigating weapons smuggling and hidden files that might expose it, then I owe it to him to see this through." He glanced briefly at Kate. "Besides, I've been sheriff long enough to recognize a frame job when I see one." Kate nodded, feeling the first glimmer of real hope since her ranch had burned. Shadow settled in the back seat, his vigilant gaze alternating between the road behind them and Kate's face. ever attentive to her emotional state. "Tell me about these files," Callahan said as they turned onto a less-traveled county road. "Any idea what they might contain or where David might have hidden them?" Kate considered the question. If they're physical files, they would have been in the house somewhere. But most of our important documents were in a fire safe, and I never saw anything unusual there. She frowned, thinking. If they're digital, David had several encrypted drives he used for work, but those would have been with him when he deployed. Unless he made copies, Callahan suggested. Did he have any hiding places, somewhere secure but accessible? Kate's mind raced through possibilities. David had been meticulous about operational security, a habit that had extended to their home life. He'd installed the gun safe, reinforced doors and windows, established contingency plans for various emergencies, and he'd created the supply cache, Kate said suddenly, memory clicking into place. David buried a waterproof container on the property emergency supplies, some cash, spare keys, said it was a precaution in case we ever needed to evacuate quickly. She looked at Callahan, excitement building. "It's marked on our property survey, disguised as an irrigation notation?" Callahan nodded approvingly. "Sounds like David. Where's the survey kept?" "In the fire safe," Kate replied, deflating slightly. "Which is probably melted slag by now." "Maybe not," Callahan said. "House fires are destructive, but fire safes are designed to withstand temperatures up to 1,700 degrees. If the fire department responded at all, the safe might have survived." Hope flickered anew. "But I can't exactly walk back onto the property to check. Not with Hawkins and the cartel looking for me." "No," Callahan agreed, turning onto an even smaller road that was little more than a dirt track. "But I can, as a neighboring sheriff, I could justify visiting the scene as part of an ongoing investigation. It wouldn't raise too many flags." "It's too dangerous," Kate protested. "If Hawkins suspects you're helping me, Hawkins doesn't know we have history." Callahan interrupted. "As far as he knows, I'm just another sheriff doing my job. Besides, I won't go alone." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I have deputies I trust. Men who served with David and me." The dirt track narrowed further, winding through dense scrub brush until they reached a small clearing dominated by a rustic cabin, built from rough-hewn logs and set against a rocky hillside. The structure looked like it had grown organically from the surrounding landscape. "Not much to look at," Callahan admitted as he parked behind the cabin, concealing the vehicle from the access road. "But it's defensible and off any grid you can name. Solar power, well water, stocked with enough supplies to last a month." Inside, the cabin was spare but functional, a main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen, and two doors leading to what Kate presumed were bedrooms. Gun cabinets lined one wall, their contents visible through glass doors, shotguns, rifles, and an impressive array of handguns. "Make yourself at home," Callahan said, securing the door behind them. "There's a perimeter alarm system, motion sensors. Anyone approaches within half a mile will know." Kate unclipped Shadow's leash, allowing the dog to investigate their new surroundings. He moved methodically through the cabin, sniffing carefully at each room before returning to Kate's side, apparently satisfied with the security of their position. "I need to make some calls," Callahan said, pulling out a satellite phone. "Set things in motion. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry." While Callahan stepped onto the porch to make his calls, Kate explored the cabin more thoroughly. One of the bedrooms had been converted into a tactical operations center of sorts, with maps of the surrounding counties pinned to the walls and a ham radio set up on a desk. The other contained a simple bed and dresser, with a small attached bathroom. She was examining the weapons cabinet when Callahan returned, his expression grim. "Problem?" Kate asked, immediately alert to his change in demeanor. "Maybe," he replied, setting the phone down. "The DEA agents arrived at the diner and took our cartel friends into custody. But they also had questions about you, specific questions that suggest they know exactly who you are and what happened at your ranch." "Diego," Kate said, understanding dawning. The DEA agent who warned me about Turner Development. Callahan nodded. They wouldn't confirm his existence, but they seemed particularly interested in what you might have told me about any contacts you'd had. Do you think Diego betrayed me? I think, Callahan said carefully, that in this game, the only people we can absolutely trust are in this room. He glanced at Shadow. All three of us. Kate processed this, the weight of their isolation settling more heavily on her shoulders. So what's our next move? I've arranged for two of my deputies, former Rangers who served with David, to meet me at the Rio Seco Sheriff's Office tomorrow morning. Official liaison visit, nothing suspicious. While I'm keeping Hawkins busy with bureaucratic nonsense, they'll check out your ranch, see if the fire safe survived. Callahan paused. In the meantime, we need to consider what's in those files that's worth killing for. Kate moved to the tactical room, studying the county maps. The weapons smuggling investigation. If David found evidence implicating law enforcement or military personnel, that would be explosive, Callahan agreed, following her. But it might be even bigger than that. The cartels have been evolving, forming alliances with international terrorism networks. If they're moving military-grade weapons across the border using compromised officials, the implications go beyond local corruption. The suggestion sent a chill through Kate. David had never discussed the details of his operations, but she remembered his increasing tension before his final deployment, the late-night secure calls, the mounting sense that he was involved in something that extended far beyond conventional military actions. If that's what he found, she said slowly, it would explain why they're so desperate to recover the files and why they would go to such lengths to eliminate anyone who might have seen them. Callahan's expression darkened, including David himself. The implication hung in the air between them, giving voice to the suspicion that had been growing in Kate's mind since Hawkins' revelation about the files. If David had uncovered a weapons smuggling operation involving high-ranking officials, his death might not have been the result of an insurgent ambush, as reported. It might have been an orchestrated elimination. I need to see those files, Kate said, her voice hardening with resolve. Not just to clear my name or save my ranch. I need to know what really happened to my husband. Callahan nodded, understanding reflected in his eyes. We'll find them. But first, you need rest. It's been a long day, and tomorrow may be longer. He gestured to the bedroom. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Exhaustion suddenly washed over Kate, the adrenaline of the day's events giving way to bone-deep weariness. She hadn't slept properly since fleeing the ranch, catching only brief moments of rest in the truck with Shadow standing guard. Wake me in 4 hours, she said, military precision reasserting itself. We'll rotate watches. Deal, Callahan agreed, in the bedroom. Kate removed her boots but kept her clothes on, ready to move at a moment's notice. Shadow settled on the floor beside the bed, his body aligned with the door, ears still alert despite his own evident fatigue. Good boy, Kate murmured, reaching down to stroke his fur. We're not alone anymore. Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor, acknowledging her words with canine understanding. As Kate drifted towards sleep, her last conscious thought was of David not as she had last seen him, boarding a transport plane for his final deployment, but as he had been in their happiest moments on the ranch, laughing with Shadow bounding at his side. For the first time since the nightmare began, Kate felt something beyond fear and determination. She felt purpose, a clear mission that transcended mere survival. Find the files, expose the truth, honor David's final investigation. It was what he would have done for her, Sean. Dawn was breaking when a series of short, sharp barks from Shadow jolted Kate from sleep. She was on her feet instantly, weapon in hand, moving toward the bedroom door before her conscious mind had fully engaged. Callahan met her in the main room, already armed and alert. Perimeter alarm, he said quietly. Northeast quadrant. Single vehicle approaching slowly. Lights off. Kate moved to the window, careful to stay concealed as she peered through a gap in the curtains. The property was still mostly in shadow, but she could make out the faint outline of a vehicle moving along the dirt track toward the cabin. Could be your deputies arriving early, she suggested, though her tone conveyed doubt. They wouldn't approach without calling first. Callahan replied, checking his weapon. And they definitely wouldn't come lights off. He nodded toward the tactical room. There's a trap door under the desk. Leads to a root cellar with an emergency exit that comes out about 50 yards behind the cabin. If this goes sideways, that's your exfil route. Kate shook her head firmly. I'm not running again. Not without knowing who's after us and what they want. Before Callahan could argue, Shadow moved to the front door, his posture alert but not aggressive. He sniffed at the gap beneath the door, then turned to Kate with a soft whine that contrasted sharply with his earlier warning barks. He doesn't see them as a threat. Kate translated, familiar with Shadow's behavior patterns. The dog had been trained to differentiate between various types of potential dangers, and his current demeanor suggested caution rather than imminent attack. The vehicle stopped about 30 yards from the cabin. Through the window, Kate could now see that it was a battered pickup truck, not the type of vehicle typically used by cartel enforcers or law enforcement. A single figure emerged, moving with a slight limp toward the cabin. Hands where I can see them, Callahan called out, positioning himself to the side of the door with his weapon ready. I'm unarmed, a male voice replied, accent marking him as Latino. I'm looking for Catherine Harlo. My name is Diego Vasquez. Kate and Callahan exchanged glances. The DEA agent, Callahan mouthed silently. Kate nodded. Though uncertainty furrowed her brow, she moved to the door, keeping to the side opposite Callahan. Prove it, she called. We met at your ranch gate, Diego replied. I warned you about Turner Development being a front for the cartel. Shadow was with you. He didn't trust me at first, but he didn't attack either. The details matched Kate's memory, but caution prevailed. How did you find us? I placed a tracker on your truck when we met, Diego admitted. Standard procedure for potential witnesses in cartel investigations. When I lost your signal near Sanderson, I got worried. Started checking known locations in the area. Sheriff Callahan's hunting cabin seemed like a logical destination. Callahan frowned at this revelation. Not many people know about this place. The DEA maintains files on law enforcement officers in border counties, Diego explained, especially those with military backgrounds and remote properties. Kate considered their options. If Diego was truly a DEA agent, he could be a valuable ally. If he was something else, a cartel plant, perhaps letting him inside could be a fatal mistake. Shadow whined again, more insistently this time, his behavior suggesting recognition rather than threat assessment. Shadow thinks he's legitimate, Kate said quietly to Callahan. Your call, the sheriff replied, deferring to her judgment of the dog's reaction. Kate made her decision. Step back from the door, she called to Diego. Hands on your head, turn around slowly. When she opened the door, weapon trained on the visitor, Kate found Diego exactly as instructed 10 feet back, hands on his head, facing away from the cabin. She recognized him immediately as the man who had warned her at the ranch, though he looked more haggard now, with several days' growth of beard and visible exhaustion in his posture. Inside, she directed. Slowly, Diego complied, maintaining the non-threatening posture as he entered the cabin. Shadow approached him cautiously, sniffing his legs and hands before apparently confirming his identity and returning to Kate's side. You can lower your hands, Kate said, though she kept her weapon ready. Now explain why I shouldn't consider you a threat, given that the DEA seems very interested in my whereabouts. Diego slowly lowered his arms, wincing slightly as though the movement caused pain. Because I'm no longer operating under DEA authority, he said, his voice weighted with resignation. I've been burned, suspended pending investigation for unauthorized contact with civilians and compromising an ongoing operation. Convenient timing, Callahan observed, skepticism evident in his tone. Not convenient, deliberate. Diego's expression hardened. The same people who want Mrs. Harlo silenced have reached inside the DEA. When I warned her about Turner development, I violated protocols, gave them the excuse they needed to cut me loose. Why risk it? Kate asked, studying his face for signs of deception. Why warn me at all? Diego met her gaze directly. Because your husband helped my brother. 8 years ago, Miguel was a Marine assigned to a joint task force with a SEAL team in Colombia. Their convoy was ambushed. David Harlo carried Miguel 3 miles to extraction with a shattered femur, under fire the entire way. His eyes never wavered from Kate's. My brother walks with a limp, but he walks. He has a family, a life, because of your husband. The story rang true. David had served in Colombia early in his career, though he'd spoken little about those operations. And the depth of emotion in Diego's voice wasn't something that could be easily fabricated. All right, Kate said, lowering her weapon, though not holstering it. Let's say I believe you're here to help. What exactly are you offering? Information, Diego replied, and a warning. The cartel knows you're looking for files your husband hid. They've expanded their search radius beyond your ranch, and they've brought in specialist former military contractors who specialize in tracking and elimination. Callahan stepped forward. How do they know about the files that information wasn't widely shared? Diego's expression darkened. Because Sheriff Hawkins told them he's been on El Cuchillo's payroll for years, facilitating weapon shipments across county lines. But he's not the biggest fish. The operation extends into military supply chains, border patrol, even federal agencies. Which is why you've been suspended, Kate surmised. You got too close to someone with influence. Diego nodded grimly. My supervisor received orders directly from Washington to shut down my investigation. No explanation, no appeal. That's when I knew the corruption went higher than I'd imagined. The implications were staggering. If what Diego suggested was true, they were facing not just a local cartel operation, but a sophisticated network with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of law enforcement and possibly government. We need those files, Kate said, conviction hardening her voice. They're the only leverage we have, the only way to expose this, and the only way to prove what really happened to David, Callahan added, voicing the thought that had been growing in Kate's mind. Diego looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. You think his death wasn't an accident? I think, Kate replied carefully, that my husband found evidence of weapons smuggling involving high-ranking officials, and shortly after, he was conveniently killed in action during a classified operation, with no body recovered. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Shadow moved closer to Kate, sensing her emotional turmoil and offering silent support with his presence. If you're right, Diego finally said, then these files aren't just evidence of corruption. They're a death sentence for anyone possessing them unless they can be delivered to the right people. People beyond the reach of this network. Which brings us back to finding them, Callahan interjected, practical concerns reasserting themselves. I have deputies checking the ranch today. If the fire safe survived, we might have a lead on their location. Diego nodded thoughtfully. That's a start, but we should also consider alternatives. If your husband was as thorough as his reputation suggests, he would have built in redundancies, backup locations. The observation struck Kate with unexpected force. Of course David would have backups. It had been one of his core principles, drummed into him through years of military operations, where Murphy's Law wasn't just a saying, but a daily reality. Anything that could go wrong would go wrong, so plan accordingly. The storage unit, she said suddenly, memory clicking into place. David maintained a climate-controlled storage unit in Alpine, under his mother's maiden name, said it was for items too valuable for the ranch. She had assumed he meant family heirlooms or sensitive equipment, but now a new possibility emerged. He renewed the lease for 5 years just before his last deployment. That sounds promising, Callahan agreed. Alpine's about 3 hours from here. We could reach it by afternoon. No, Diego countered, his expression grave. Not all of us. If the cartel has identified you two as targets, they'll be watching transport routes, hotels, rental car agencies. 3 people traveling together would draw attention. So what do you suggest? Kate asked, sensing he had already formulated a plan. I go alone, Diego said simply. I'm still officially a federal agent. Even if suspended, I can move more freely. Access the storage facility with a warrant if necessary. Callahan shook his head. Too risky. If your cover is blown, you'd have no backup. And if we all go, we risk leading them directly to the files, Diego countered. Besides, I'm already burned. My career at the DEA is over, regardless of how this plays out. Might as well make it count for something. Kate considered the arguments, weighing tactical considerations against the urgent need to secure the files before the cartel found them. Shadow pressed against her leg, a warm reminder of the stakes involved. This wasn't just about her safety or even justice for David. It was about exposing a corruption that threatened national security. We split up, she decided finally. Diego checks the storage unit. Callahan maintains his original plan to send deputies to the ranch. And Shadow and I, she added with determined finality, are going to pay a visit to Sheriff Hawkins. Both men began to protest simultaneously, but Kate raised a hand to silence them. Hawkins is the key local player. He knows I'm alive and on the run. Right now, he's coordinating the search for me, which means he's our best source of information about the cartel's movements. Her eyes hardened. And he owes me answers about what he meant when he mentioned David's files. It's too dangerous, Callahan insisted. Hawkins won't be alone. The sheriff's office will be crawling with deputies, many of whom are probably on the cartel's payroll. I'm not suggesting a frontal assault, Kate clarified. But Hawkins lives alone on 5 acres outside town, and according to Diego, he's been helping move weapons shipments. Her gaze shifted to the DEA agent. When's the next scheduled movement? Diego hesitated, then relented. Tonight, midnight, a warehouse outside Rio Seco, then transferred to vehicles for border crossing near your ranch. Hawkins provides escort through the county, makes sure no legitimate law enforcement interferes. Which means he'll be away from his house, Kate concluded. And his files, contacts, whatever evidence he keeps of his arrangement with the cartel. Callahan studied her with a mixture of concern and reluctant admiration. You're talking about breaking into the sheriff's house. I'm talking about gathering intelligence from a corrupt official who burned down my home and threatened my life, Kate corrected, steel in her voice. Hawkins knows something about David's death. I intend to find out what it is. The determination in her tone made further argument futile. Callahan sighed, the sound of a man who recognized a battle already lost. At least take proper equipment, he said, moving to one of the gun cabinets. Secure communications, night vision, non-lethal options. As Callahan gathered tactical gear, Diego approached Kate, his expression somber. Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Harlo, one of the best I've ever known. Whatever we find in those files, whatever truth comes to light about his death, it won't change that. The simple acknowledgement of what might lie ahead, the possibility that the truth about David's death could be even darker than she imagined, touched Kate unexpectedly. Thank you, she said quietly, but I need to know. No matter what, Diego nodded understanding. We all have our ghosts to lay to rest. Shadow pressed closer to Kate's side, as if sensing the emotional currents in the room. She rested her hand on his head, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. Whatever came next, whatever truths the files revealed, she wouldn't face them alone. They spent the remainder of the morning planning their separate missions, establishing communication protocols and emergency rendezvous points. By midday, they had 3 coordinated operations ready to launch. Diego would head to Alpine to check the storage unit. Callahan would meet his deputies and investigate the ranch. And Kate would infiltrate Hawkins' residence during the weapons to transport. As they prepared to depart, Kate found herself standing before a small mirror in the cabin's bathroom, studying her reflection. The woman who gazed back at her bore little resemblance to the grieving widow who had been managing a struggling ranch just days before. This woman's eyes held a hardened resolve, a focused intensity that came from having a clear mission. I'm coming for answers. David, she whispered to her reflection. Whatever it takes. Shadow waited at her feet, his attention never wavering from her face, ready to follow wherever she led. Together, they would uncover the truth that powerful forces had tried to bury, a truth that might rewrite not only the story of David's death, but the narrative of corruption that had allowed it to happen. The hunt for justice had begun in earnest. Darkness cloaked the outskirts of Rio Seco as Kate moved silently through the scrub brush surrounding Sheriff Bill Hawkins' property. Shadow glided beside her like a phantom, his dark coat blending into the night. They had been observing the house for over an hour, confirming that Hawkins had indeed departed at 11:30 p.m. in his personal truck, right on schedule for the midnight weapons transport Diego had described. Kate adjusted the night vision goggles Callahan had provided, scanning the property's perimeter one final time. The sheriff's home was a sprawling ranch-style structure set back from the main road, isolated enough to ensure privacy, yet close enough to town to maintain his image as the accessible local lawman. No visible security cameras, though Kate suspected the apparent lack of surveillance was deliberate misdirection. A man in Hawkins' position with his particular extracurricular activities would certainly have some form of protection. Let's find out what the sheriff's hiding, she whispered to Shadow, who responded with a barely perceptible change in posture, transitioning from watchful stillness to coiled readiness. They approached from the rear of the property, using a dry creek bed for cover. Kate had dressed entirely in black, her face darkened with tactical paint, movements measured and deliberate. The tactical gear Callahan had provided included not just the night vision equipment, but also a lockpicking set, a signal jammer for basic security systems, and a small caliber pistol with suppressor, though Kate hoped the latter wouldn't be necessary. At the edge of the manicured lawn surrounding the house, Kate paused for another visual sweep. No movement, no lights. The property remained still. Perimeter, she whispered to Shadow, employing one of the specialized commands David had taught the dog. Instantly, Shadow began a silent circuit of the immediate area, trained to detect any human presence through scent or sound. The dog returned after completing his sweep, sitting quietly at Kate's side to indicate all clear. She nodded and moved forward, crouched low, making her way to the back entrance of the house. The door was equipped with a standard deadbolt, surprising for a man with Hawkins' paranoia. Unless he relied on more subtle security measures, Kate deployed the signal jammer before approaching the door, disrupting any wireless security systems within range. Then, with practiced precision, she set to work on the lock. The skills David had taught her originally shared during quiet evenings at the ranch as interesting tactical trivia now proved invaluable as the deadbolt yielded to her manipulation. The back door opened onto a mudroom lined with boots, jackets, and gun racks, the typical entrance of a rural Texas home. Kate waited at the threshold, allowing Shadow to enter first. The dog moved with purpose, nose working the air currents, trained to detect not just people but the distinctive chemical sense of explosives, firearms, and certain drugs. Shadow paused near a side cabinet, his attention fixed and body language subtly altered. Kate knelt beside him, examining the cabinet carefully. A slight gap in the seam revealed it wasn't simply storage, it was a concealed door. "Good boy," she murmured, running gentle fingers through the fur between his ears before turning her attention to the hidden entrance. No visible lock or handle, suggesting a pressure mechanism. Kate pressed carefully along the edges until a soft click rewarded her effort. The panel swung inward to reveal a small room beyond Hawkins' private office. Unlike the deliberately mundane appearance of the rest of the house, this space spoke of wealth and secrets. A large mahogany desk dominated the center, its surface clear except for a high-end laptop and a crystal decanter of amber liquid. The walls were lined with photographs Hawkins with various politicians and military officers, all framed in expensive wood and lit by recessed lighting. Kate moved to the desk, careful not to disturb anything as she examined its contents. The laptop was password protected, as expected. The drawers were locked, but yielded quickly to her picks. Inside the central drawer, she found what appeared to be a ledger handwritten entries with dates, locations, and amounts, followed by initials, a careful accounting of bribes or payoffs. Perhaps. "What else are you hiding, Bill?" Kate murmured, continuing her methodical search of the office. A wall safe behind one of the photographs took longer to crack, but eventually surrendered its contents, stacks of cash in multiple currencies, several passports in different names but all bearing Hawkins' photograph, and a small external hard drive. Kate pocketed the drive, her pulse quickening. This could contain the evidence they needed, proof of Hawkins' involvement with the cartel, possibly even information about David's investigation. She was photographing the ledger with a small digital camera when Shadow suddenly tensed, his attention shifting to the office doorway. "What is it?" Kate whispered, instantly alert to the dog's warning. Shadow's posture indicated someone approaching, not in the house yet, but near. Kate quickly replaced the ledger, closed the drawers, and pocketed her tools. She had what she came for. Now it was time for a strategic withdrawal. But before they could retreat, headlights swept across the property outside a vehicle turning into the driveway. Hawkins shouldn't be returning yet. The weapons transport would take hours to complete. Someone else was arriving. Someone unexpected. Kate extinguished her light and moved to a window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. A black SUV had parked beside Hawkins' empty spot, and two men were exiting the vehicle, both armed, both moving with the purposeful alertness of professionals. "Not good," Kate breathed. These weren't local deputies or casual visitors. Their bearing and equipment marked them clearly as the specialized hunters Diego had warned about, former military contractors brought in by the cartel to track her down. Shadow pressed against her leg, sensing her tension but awaiting commands. Kate calculated options rapidly. The back door was their planned exit route, but with the new arrivals approaching the house, that path was likely compromised. The office had no windows large enough for escape. They were effectively trapped. "Hide," she ordered Shadow, pointing to the space beneath the desk. It wasn't ideal, but the dog's dark coat might blend with the shadows enough to escape immediate detection. Kate herself moved behind the door, drawing the suppressed pistol and steadying her breathing. If the men entered the office, she would have only one chance to neutralize them before the situation deteriorated into a firefight she couldn't win. Keys jangled at the front door. Voices murmured in low conversation too distant to make out words, but the tone suggested professional discussion rather than casual exchange. Footsteps moved through the house, methodical and purposeful. They were searching, room by room. Kate tightened her grip on the pistol, controlling her breathing as David had taught her. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Keep the mind clear, the hands steady. Be present in the moment, aware but not anxious. The footsteps approached the mudroom. A beam of light swept the space, lingering on the gun rack and boot collection. Then, ominously, it shifted to the cabinet concealing the office entrance. "Look at this," a male voice said, accent suggesting Eastern European origins. "Seam doesn't match the rest." "Hidden room, does you?" another voice confirmed. "Typical paranoid cop shit." The pressure mechanism clicked as they explored the cabinet's edges. Kate pressed herself flatter against the wall behind the door, weapon raised, every muscle coiled with tension. Shadow remained perfectly still beneath the desk, displaying the discipline instilled through years of military training. The panel swung open. Light flooded the office as the men entered, weapons drawn but held low alert, but not expecting immediate threat. Kate held her position, waiting for them to advance fully into the room before making her move. "Someone's been here," the first man observed, moving toward the desk where Kate had been examining the ledger. "Drawers not fully closed." The second man moved deeper into the office, sweeping his light across the walls and furniture. "Recent activity, within the hour." They were professionals, reading the subtle signs Kate had tried to minimize. The first man reached for a radio at his belt. "Eagle 1 to base. Possible intrusion at package 2. Request." Kate moved before he could finish the transmission, stepping from behind the door and striking with calculated precision. Her first shot caught the man with the radio in the shoulder of his weapon arm, causing him to drop both gun and communication device as he stumbled forward with a strangled cry. The suppressor muffled the report to little more than a sharp cough. The second man reacted with trained reflexes, pivoting toward the threat with his weapon rising. But Kate had anticipated this, already changing position as shadow erupted from beneath the desk, launching directly at the man's gun arm with military precision. Powerful jaws clamped around the wrist, forcing the weapon to discharge harmlessly into the floor as man and dog crashed together in a chaotic tangle of limbs and snarls. Kate kicked the first man's dropped weapon across the room, then pressed her pistol against the base of his skull as he struggled to rise despite his wounded shoulder. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice deadly calm. "Tell your friend to stand down, or I paint the carpet with your brain matter." The wounded man froze, then called out in a strained voice, "Stand down! Mikhail, stand down!" The second man, still wrestling with shadow, ceased his struggles. The dog maintained his grip, awaiting Kate's command. "Weapons on the floor," Kate directed. "Slowly, then face down, hands behind your heads." Once both men were secured, their additional weapons and communication devices removed and placed out of reach, Kate maintained her position of control, pistol unwavering. "Who sent you, Quay? Go to hell!" The first man spat, blood seeping through his fingers where he clutched his wounded shoulder. Kate pressed the gun barrel harder against his skull. "Wrong answer. Let's try again. Who sent you, and what are you looking for?" The second man, Mikhail, spoke through gritted teeth. "We work for security consultant, private contractor, just following orders, which are secure property of client," Mikhail replied evasively. "Retrieve missing items." "The files," Kate surmised. "David Harlo's files on weapons smuggling." A flicker of surprise crossed the man's features before he could suppress it. "We don't know contents, just told to find and secure." Kate studied them, noting the quality of their tactical gear, the professional demeanor even in defeat. These weren't cartel thugs, they were high-end mercenaries, the kind employed for sensitive operations where deniability was essential. "Who's your employer?" she pressed. "Not the security consultant, the actual client." The men exchanged glances, but remained silent. Kate changed tactics. "You have satellite phones," she observed, nodding toward the equipment she'd confiscated. "Direct line to your handler. I assume..." More silence, but the slight tension in their postures confirmed her guess. "Here's what's going to happen," Kate said with deadly precision. "You're going to call your handler and tell them you found what they're looking for. I'll be listening to every word. One hint that something's wrong, one code phrase or distress signal, and neither of you leaves this room breathing. Understood?" The first man, still bleeding from his shoulder wound, nodded grimly. Kate retrieved one of the satellite phones, but kept her distance as she tossed it to Mikhail. "Speaker mode, no sudden movements." Mikhail dialed with careful deliberation, then activated the speaker. After 3 rings, a voice answered, American, male, authoritative. "Report. This is Team 2. Mikhail responded, his voice professionally neutral despite the circumstances. "We've secured the package at location 3. "Confirmation code," the voice demanded. Mikhail hesitated, glancing at Kate, who pressed her pistol more firmly against his partner's head in silent warning. "Sierra Echo 9 Delta," he recited carefully. A brief pause, then acknowledged. "Status of contents. Intact. Hard drive recovered as specified. Good. Proceed to extraction point Delta for handoff. Usual protocols." "Understood," Mikhail replied. "ETA approximately 90 minutes. Acknowledged. Report any complications immediately." The call ended. Kate retrieved the phone, mind racing with the implications of what she'd just heard. The operation was more organized than she'd anticipated. Confirmation codes. extraction points, established protocols. This wasn't just a cartel searching for incriminating evidence. This had the hallmarks of a professional intelligence operation. Who was that? She demanded. Name, position? The wounded man grimaced through his pain. We don't know. Handler only, never meets in person. But you have an extraction point, Kate pressed. Where? Abandoned airstrip 20 miles south. Mikhail supplied after a moment's hesitation. Small plane comes, takes package. We never see where it goes. Kate considered this information. An airstrip suggested the evidence was being moved out of the country, or at least to a location far from Texas, which meant whoever wanted these files had resources extending well beyond local law enforcement or even regional cartel operations. Shadow growled softly, reminding Kate that time was limited. They needed to move before any check-in protocols revealed the deception. Both of you, on your stomachs, she ordered. Hands behind your backs. Using zip ties from her tactical kit, Kate secured both men, then gagged them with strips torn from a decorative throw. It wouldn't hold them indefinitely, but it would buy the time she needed. Shadow to guard, she commanded, allowing the dog to maintain watch while she quickly photographed the remaining contents of the office, focusing on the ledger entries and the names visible in Hawkins' photographs. The hard drive from the safe remained securely in her pocket, potentially the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. As Kate prepared to leave, a new thought struck her. The men had mentioned Location 3, implying there were other places being searched simultaneously. If they were checking Hawkins' house, where else might they be looking? The answer hit her with chilling clarity. Callahan's cabin, the very place where Diego had tracked her, where they had planned their operations. If these contractors had similar resources, we need to warn the others, she told Shadow, who had maintained his vigilant stance over the restrained men. Come. They exited through the back door, careful to reset the hidden office entrance to avoid immediate discovery. The night remained quiet. No signs of additional personnel or vehicles approaching. Kate led Shadow to the cover of trees at the property's edge, then retrieved the secure phone Callahan had provided. She dialed his number, anxiety mounting with each unanswered ring. Finally, his voice came through, tight with tension. Callahan, it's Kate. We may be compromised. Professional contractors at Hawkins' house, looking for the files. They mentioned that multiple locations being searched. Damn it, Callahan swore. The cabin, but possibly. Have you heard from Diego? Not yet. He should have reached Alpine by now. Callahan's voice lowered. My deputies found something at your ranch. The fire safe survived, partially melted, but intact. Inside was a property survey with markings exactly where you described. Kate's pulse quickened. The cache. They were checking it now, should have confirmation within the hour. A pause, then, what did you find at Hawkins' place? Hard drive from his safe, and I intercepted 2 contractors who were sent to retrieve it. They're expecting a handoff at an abandoned airstrip south of town. Could be a trap, Callahan warned. Or it could be our chance to identify who's at the top of this operation. Kate countered. These aren't just cartel thugs, Mike. They're professional military contractors with satellite communications and extraction protocols. Someone with serious resources is coordinating this. Callahan absorbed this in silence before responding. All right, I'll meet you at the rendezvous point we discussed. We can secure the hard drive and plan our next move. His tone darkened. But be careful. If they are as professional as you say, those men won't be your only problem. Kate ended the call and moved deeper into the brush, Shadow close beside her. The exhilaration of successful infiltration was fading, replaced by the sobering reality of their situation. They had evidence now, or at least a lead to evidence, but also confirmation that they faced an adversary with far-reaching resources and determination. As they made their way toward the designated meeting point, Kate's thoughts returned to the central question that had driven her since Hawkins' revelation about the files. What had David discovered that was worth killing for? And how deep did the conspiracy go? The answers, she hoped, waited on the hard drive now secured in her pocket. The abandoned gas station 10 miles outside Rio Seco had been their predetermined rendezvous point, remote enough to avoid casual observation, but accessible by multiple approach routes. Kate arrived first, securing the perimeter with Shadow before taking position inside the derelict building, weapon ready as she waited for Callahan. When headlights finally appeared on the distant road, Kate tensed, tracking the approaching vehicle through a broken window. The county-issued SUV matched Callahan's, but caution prevailed until she confirmed his identity as he stepped out, hands clearly visible in a gesture of reassurance. "Clear," she called, allowing Shadow to relax his alert posture. Callahan entered, tactical vest over his civilian clothes and sidearm holstered at his hip. His expression was grim as he surveyed Kate's condition. "You're hurt," he observed, nodding toward a tear in her sleeve where blood had dried. Kate glanced down, noticing the injury for the first time, a minor graze from when the second contractor had discharged his weapon during the struggle with Shadow. "It's nothing," she dismissed. "What did your deputies find?" Callahan produced a weatherproof metal container, roughly the size of a shoebox, buried exactly where the survey indicated, untouched by the fire. Kate's breath caught as she recognized the container, identical to those David had used for tactical storage during deployments. With careful hands, she opened the latches, revealing the contents: a sealed waterproof bag containing a laptop, an external hard drive similar to the one she'd taken from Hawkins' safe, and a handwritten letter addressed simply to Kate. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unsealed the letter, recognizing David's distinctive handwriting immediately. Shadow pressed closer to her side, as if sensing the emotional significance of the moment. "If you're reading this," Kate began, voice steady despite the ache in her chest, "then things have gone sideways. I hope this contingency would never be necessary. But hope isn't a strategy." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "The drives contain evidence of weapons being diverted from military supply chains to cartels and terrorist organizations. The operation involves high-ranking officials in law enforcement, military procurement, and border security. I've identified key players and documented money trails, but the ultimate beneficiary remains elusive, someone with enough influence to bury investigations and silence witnesses." Kate looked up, meeting Callahan's somber gaze. He knew they were onto him. "Keep reading," Callahan encouraged gently. "I've uploaded encrypted copies to secure servers with distribution protocols if I don't reset them every 30 days. Consider this insurance and leverage. Trust no one except Mike Callahan. He's the only person I've briefed who remains clear of this. If something happens to me, take this to FBI Special Agent Marcus Wells in the San Antonio field office. No one else." Kate's voice faltered on the final lines. "I'm sorry for the danger this puts you in. Know that everything I've done has been to protect what matters most. I love you. Always. David." The letter shook in Kate's hands, emotions warring within her grief at the confirmation that David had known the risks he faced, rage at those who had targeted him, determination to complete what he had started. Shadow whined softly, pressing his head against her knee in silent support. "He knew," she whispered. "All this time, he knew they might kill him." Callahan's expression reflected his own pain. "David was always 3 steps ahead in tactical planning. Even when we were deployed, he anticipated contingencies others missed." He gestured to the drives. "That's why he created this fallback. He knew the information was too important to die with him." Kate carefully returned the letter to its waterproof protection, then examined the laptop and drive. "We need to see what's on these, and compare it to what I found at Hawkins' house." "Not here, Callahan cautioned. "This location was predetermined. If the contractors who found you have similar training, they might anticipate our movements. Then where the cabin's potentially compromised." "I have another option," Callahan replied. "An old hunting blind in the state park. Off any grid. No one knows about it except my most trusted deputies. We can review the files there, then contact this FBI agent Wells." As they prepared to depart, Kate's secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. The text was from Diego's number. containing only GPS coordinates and one word urgent. Diego's reached out, she told Callahan, showing him the message. These coordinates are about 15 miles from here. Callahan studied the location. That's nowhere near Alpine or the storage facility. Why would he be there? Maybe he found something, Kate suggested, though uncertainty colored her tone. Or maybe he's in trouble. Or it's a trap, Callahan added grimly. If his phone was compromised, the possibility hung between them. Another layer of risk in an already dangerous situation. Kate weighed their options, considering what David would do in similar circumstances. We verify but maintain tactical advantage, she decided. Approach with caution, establish visual confirmation before engagement. If it's Diego in trouble, we help. If it's a trap, we withdraw. Callahan nodded approval. Solid plan, but we secure the drives first. Too valuable to risk in a potential ambush. They transferred the files to Callahan's vehicle, concealing them beneath a specially designed compartment in the rear cargo area. Kate kept the hard drive from Hawkins' safe on her person, a strategic division of the evidence to ensure that even if one set was captured, the other might survive. With Shadow in the back seat, they departed the gas station, Callahan driving while Kate maintained vigilant watch on their surroundings. The coordinates Diego had sent led them to a remote area of ranch land, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through scrub brush and low hills. Kill the lights for the final approach, Kate instructed as they neared the location. Let's get eyes on the situation before announcing ourselves. Callahan complied. Navigating the final quarter mile in darkness, they parked behind a natural rise that provided cover, then proceeded on foot, moving with the silent efficiency of those trained for combat operations. Shadow took point, his superior senses alert for any sign of danger or deception. The coordinates led to a small clearing where a vehicle was parked, Diego's rental car, its driver's side door open, interior light casting a weak glow in the darkness. There was no sign of Diego himself. I don't like this, Callahan murmured, scanning the perimeter with practiced eyes. Too exposed. No tactical reason to stop here. Kate signaled Shadow to circle the area, watching as the dog methodically searched for scents or signs of movement. When he returned to her side without alerting, she frowned. He's not detecting Diego nearby, but someone's been here recently. They approached the vehicle cautiously. Weapons ready. Inside, Diego's phone rested on the driver's seat, the likely source of the text message. But what caught Kate's attention was the blood smeared across the steering wheel and dashboard. Not a large amount, but enough to suggest injury. Ambush, Callahan concluded grimly. They used his phone to lure us here. Oh. Kate nodded, the tactical assessment aligning with her own conclusion. But why leave the scene? Why not stay and complete the trap? The answer materialized with the distant sound of an approaching helicopter, its rhythmic thumping growing louder as it neared their position. Simultaneously, Shadow tensed, his attention fixing on something beyond the clearing movement in the brush, approaching from multiple directions. We need to go, Kate urged, already retreating toward their concealed vehicle. Now! But as they turned to withdraw, the night erupted in blinding light as powerful spotlights from the helicopter illuminated the clearing. A mechanically amplified voice boomed from above. Catherine Harlo, Michael Callahan, this is the FBI. You are surrounded. Surrender your weapons and place your hands on your heads. Kate and Callahan exchanged shocked glances, the situation deteriorating far beyond their expectations. This wasn't a cartel ambush. It was a federal operation with air support and ground teams, a coordinated effort that suggested official sanction. FBI, Kate questioned, doubt evident in her voice. Or someone using their authority as cover. Callahan's expression hardened. Only one way to find out. But if we run, we're automatically guilty in their eyes. The decision crystallized with cold clarity. If this was truly the FBI, running would only complicate their situation. But if it was a corrupted operation using federal authority as cover, surrender meant certain death and the loss of everything they'd discovered. Shadow, retreat, Kate commanded. giving the dog the signal to withdraw to their predetermined fallback position. The dog hesitated, protective instincts warring with training, but ultimately obeyed, slipping into the darkness beyond the clearing. With that final precaution taken, Kate and Callahan slowly raised their hands, weapons held by trigger guards to indicate compliance without fully surrendering their arms. "Identify yourselves," Kate called out, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Badge numbers and commanding officer." The response came not from the helicopter, but from a man who emerged from the brush at the clearing's edge, tall, African-American, wearing tactical gear with FBI insignia clearly visible. Special Agent Marcus Wells, FBI San Antonio Field Office. "Your husband sent me, Mrs. Harlo." The name hit Kate like a physical blow. Marcus Wells, the very agent David had mentioned in his letter. The one person he had designated as trustworthy, beyond Callahan. "Prove it," she demanded, weapon still raised despite the circle of laser sights now dotting her chest. "How do I know you're really Wells?" The agent approached slowly, hands visible. "David Harlo contacted me 18 months ago with concerns about weapons diversion. We established a secure protocol involving a quote from Marcus Aurelius, 'What stands in the way becomes the way.' He said you would recognize it." Kate's breath caught. The quote had been inscribed inside David's wedding ring, a private mantra they had shared throughout their marriage, a reminder that obstacles could become opportunities with the right perspective. "Lower your weapons," Callahan murmured to Kate. "I think he's legitimate." Slowly, carefully, they complied, though Kate maintained her tactical awareness, ready to react if the situation changed. "Where's Diego Vasquez?" she demanded as additional agents emerged from cover, surrounding them. "In protective custody," Wells replied, approaching until he stood directly before them. "He contacted our office 3 hours ago with information about your location and activities. Said you had evidence regarding a weapons smuggling operation with potential connections to David Harlo's death. And you mounted a full tactical response based on that?" Callahan questioned skeptically. Wells' expression remained professionally neutral. "We mounted a full tactical response because satellite surveillance showed multiple armed groups converging on this location, including what appeared to be private military contractors operating without authorization on U.S. soil." He nodded toward the evidence bag visible in Kate's tactical vest. "I believe you have something that a lot of powerful people want to disappear." Kate studied the agent, weighing his words against her instincts and the limited information David had provided. Finally, she made her decision. "The hard drive in my possession is only part of it. The rest is secured elsewhere. I need assurances before I reveal that location." "Well, what kind of assurances?" "Protective custody for myself, Sheriff Callahan, and my dog, direct access to review the evidence with you present, and a commitment to pursue this regardless of where it leads or who it implicates." Wells considered her terms, then nodded. "Agreed, but we need to move quickly. The contractors who were tracking you have gone dark, which means they're likely reporting to their superiors that the operation is compromised." As if to emphasize his point, the distant sound of vehicles approaching at high speed reached them, multiple engines pushing hard toward their location. "Time to go," Wells announced, gesturing toward the helicopter now settling in the clearing. "We'll secure the secondary evidence once you're safely at our field office." Kate hesitated, unwilling to leave Shadow behind. "My dog will be recovered by my agents and brought to you," Wells assured her. "But right now, we need to extract with the primary evidence before those contractors arrive with reinforcements." The tactical logic was sound, though it pained Kate to separate from Shadow even temporarily. She whistled sharply a specific pattern that David had taught the dog, signaling him to cooperate with allies in her absence. As they boarded the helicopter, rotors already spooling up for immediate departure, Kate caught a glimpse of Shadow's silhouette at the edge of the clearing, a faithful sentinel watching her departure, ready to continue the mission when called upon. The helicopter lifted off just as the first vehicles crested the nearby hill, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. Kate clutched the hard drive, its physical weight nothing compared to the burden of truth it contained, truth that had cost David his life, truth that powerful forces had tried to bury beneath fire and deception. "We'll get justice for him," Callahan said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. Kate nodded, her gaze fixed on the receding landscape below. Justice for David, justice for herself, and perhaps, most importantly, justice for the system that had been corrupted by those sworn to protect it. The helicopter banked sharply, setting course for San Antonio and whatever revelations awaited them there. As the lights of Rio Seco faded behind them, Kate felt a strange sense of closure beginning to form, not the end of her journey, but perhaps the beginning of its final chapter. The FBI field office hummed with controlled urgency, agents moving with purpose through secured corridors as Kate and Callahan were escorted to a specialized analysis room. The hard drives, both the one from Hawkins' safe and those recovered from David's cache, had been connected to standalone systems, isolated from any networks to prevent external interference or data corruption. Shadow had arrived an hour after them, transported by Wells's agents as promised. The dog now lay at Kate's feet, seemingly relaxed but maintaining his characteristic vigilance in the unfamiliar environment. "What we're seeing here," Wells explained, gesturing to the monitors displaying David's meticulously documented evidence, "is an operation of remarkable sophistication and reach. Military-grade weapons diverted from legitimate supply chains, transported through compromised border checkpoints, and distributed to both cartels and overseas buyers with terrorist connections." Kate studied the screen, where financial transactions, surveillance photos, and shipping manifests built a damning picture of corruption. "The scope is even bigger than Diego suggested." "Much bigger," Wells confirmed grimly. "Your husband identified at least 12 high-ranking officials directly involved, including 3 in federal agencies, 4 in military procurement, and several in Border Patrol and local law enforcement." "Sheriff Hawkins," Callahan noted, pointing to a particularly incriminating series of transactions. "Among others," Wells agreed. "But what's most concerning is the organizational structure David uncovered. This isn't just opportunistic corruption. It's systematic, with layers of protection and cutouts to shield those at the top." Kate leaned forward, focusing on a recurring pattern in the financial data. These transfers all route through the same shell corporations before disappearing offshore. David was tracking them, getting closer to identifying the ultimate beneficiary. Wells nodded. "And that's likely what got him killed." He brought up a new document, David's final report, dated just days before his last deployment. According to this, he had narrowed the controlling interest to someone with direct access to military deployment information and special operations planning, someone who could ensure he was placed in vulnerable positions during his final mission. The implication hit Kate with physical force. Someone in his chain of command arranged his death. "It appears so," Wells confirmed. "And the same individual likely orchestrated the recent attacks on you and the destruction of your ranch using Sheriff Hawkins and the cartel as convenient instruments while maintaining plausible deniability." "Do we have a name?" Callahan asked, his professional demeanor barely concealing his anger at this betrayal of a fellow serviceman. Wells hesitated, then brought up a final document, a heavily encrypted message David had prepared but never sent. This was his final analysis, completed the night before his last mission. He identified the probable coordinator as General Andrew Morrison, Deputy Director of Special Operations Command. Kate felt the blood drain from her face. Morrison had attended David's memorial service, had presented her with the flag from his coffin, had spoken movingly about David's sacrifice and service, all while knowing, perhaps even orchestrating, the circumstances of his death. Morrison has the access, the authority, and the connections to manage an operation of this scale. Wells continued. And according to David's notes, he also has financial ties to several defense contractors who would benefit significantly from ongoing conflicts fueled by these diverted weapons. "So what happens now?" Kate asked, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil beneath. "Morrison has immense political protection. His reach extends through multiple agencies. Now," Wells replied with quiet determination, "we build an airtight case. David's evidence gives us the framework. but we need corroborating testimony and additional financial verification before moving against someone of Morrison's stature. Diego Vasquez, Kate suggested. He has direct knowledge of the cartel side of the operation, already providing sworn testimony. Wells confirmed. Along with 2 contractors we apprehended near the extraction point, the same ones you encountered at Hawkins' residence. They've agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. An agent entered, her expression professionally neutral as she addressed Wells. Sir, the package has arrived. Security protocols complete. Wells nodded. Bring him in. Kate exchanged puzzled glances with Callahan, both uncertain what this development meant. Shadow, however, suddenly stood, his attention fixed on the door with unusual intensity. The door opened again, and a man entered, tall, bearded, moving with a slight limp but otherwise sturdy. Despite the changes wrought by time and hardship, Kate recognized him instantly. The world seemed to stop, her breath caught in her chest, disbelief warring with desperate hope. David, her husband, stood before her, alive despite all official reports, his eyes filled with the same mixture of love and regret that had marked their final goodbye before his deployment. Shadow had already crossed the room, pressing against David's legs in joyful recognition, whining softly as his master's hand came to rest on his head with familiar affection. "Hello, Kate," David said, his voice rougher than she remembered but unmistakably his. "I'm sorry for everything." Kate moved as if in a dream, crossing the space between them with unsteady steps. Her hand reached out, touching his face, needing physical confirmation that this wasn't some cruel hallucination born of grief and exhaustion. "You're alive," she whispered, the simple fact overwhelming in its implications. "All this time." David caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. "Not by choice," he assured her. "Never by choice." Wells cleared his throat gently. Lieutenant Commander Harlo was captured during the operation in Afghanistan. His death was falsely reported as part of Morrison's cover-up. He was held by insurgents with ties to the weapons network he had been investigating, then transferred through several black sites before ending up in a private detention facility operated by contractors with connections to the same network. "I escaped 3 months ago," David continued, his gaze never leaving Kate's face. "But I couldn't come home, not directly. They were watching you, watching the ranch. I needed to recover the evidence I'd hidden and find a way to approach Wells without alerting Morrison's people. The men at the barn that night," Kate realized. "You were there, watching." David nodded. "I arrived too late to prevent the fire, but I helped create the diversion that allowed you to escape." His expression darkened with regret. "I wanted to reveal myself then, but it would have put you in even greater danger. I needed to dismantle Morrison's network first, ensure he couldn't simply eliminate us both." Callahan stepped forward, clasping David's hand in a warrior's grip. "You sneaky son of a bitch," he said, emotion rough in his voice. "I should have known it would take more than an ambush to finish you." David managed a small smile. "Good to see you too, Mike." The smile faded as he turned back to Kate. "I know this is overwhelming, finding out I'm alive after everything you've been through, after you built a life without me." "Without you," Kate echoed, incredulous. "David, I've been surviving, not living in the ranch, Shadow. They were all I had left of you." Her voice broke slightly. "And then they tried to take even that away." Shadow pressed against both of them now, completing the reunion of the small family unit that had been shattered by betrayal and violence. David knelt to properly greet the dog, receiving enthusiastic acknowledgement from the animal who had maintained faithful vigilance in his absence. "Your dog," David corrected gently, looking up at Kate. "He's been yours since the moment I left. He chose you, just like I did." Rising to his feet again, he added, "And from what I've heard, you've become quite the team." Wells allowed them this moment of reconnection before gently redirecting the conversation. Lieutenant Commander Harlo's testimony is the final piece we needed. With his first-hand account of Morrison's involvement, combined with the documentary evidence and corroborating testimonies, we can move forward with formal charges. Morrison won't go quietly, Callahan warned. Men like him always have contingency plans, escape routes, which is why we're moving simultaneously on multiple fronts. Wells explained. Financial freezes, arrest warrants for his known associates, and surveillance on all potential exit vectors. The operation begins at dawn. Kate felt David's hand find hers, fingers interlacing with familiar strength. What happens to us in the meantime, she asked. Our ranch is gone. Our lives have been torn apart. Protective custody until Morrison is apprehended. Wells replied. Then witness protection if necessary, though with the level of exposure this case will generate, the risk to you may diminish considerably once the evidence becomes public. David squeezed Kate's hand gently. Whatever comes next, we face it together. If you want that, he added, uncertainty flickering briefly across his features. I know 2 years is a long time. I wouldn't blame you if... Kate silenced him with a kiss, pouring 2 years of grief and longing into the contact. When they separated, her eyes held fierce determination. Don't you dare, she whispered. Don't you dare suggest I wouldn't wait forever if I'd known you were alive. Shadow whined softly, pressing against their legs as if to reinforce the sentiment. The three of them stood together, reunited against all odds, bound by love and loyalty that had withstood the most extreme tests. So what now? Callahan asked, breaking the emotional moment with practical consideration. We just wait for the FBI to handle everything. Not entirely. Wells responded. While we're pursuing Morrison through official channels, we still need to address the immediate threat from his network. The contractors who were hunting you will report their failure. Morrison will accelerate his contingency plans, potentially including elimination of remaining witnesses. Sheriff Hawkins, Kate surmised. He knows too much, and Morrison can't risk him making a deal. Wells nodded. Exactly. We're moving to take Hawkins into protective custody, but there's a complication. He's gone off-grid, missed the scheduled weapons transport, and hasn't been seen since you infiltrated his house. Our intelligence suggests he's attempting to negotiate with the cartel for protection. El Cuchillo, David said, recognition in his eyes. Hawkins believes the cartel will shelter him from Morrison's reach. A dangerous miscalculation, Wells observed. The cartel has more to gain by eliminating him as a liability than protecting him as an asset, especially now that his usefulness is compromised. Kate absorbed this information, tactical considerations aligning in her mind. So Morrison wants Hawkins silenced. The cartel wants him silenced. And we need him alive to testify. That's the situation, Wells confirmed. We're tracking his potential locations, but given his knowledge of local terrain and law enforcement procedures, he has advantages in evading standard search protocols. Shadow suddenly shifted, his attention fixing on Kate with the focused intensity that signaled he had something to communicate. She recognized the behavior immediately, a pattern David had trained into the dog for tactical situations. Shadow knows something, she said, kneeling to the dog's level. What is it? Boy. The dog moved to the door, then back to Kate, the behavior unmistakable to those familiar with his training. He was indicating a scent, a presence, something detected beyond their immediate environment. David watched with professional appreciation. His tracking instincts are still sharp. What's he alerting on? Kate studied Shadow's behavior, noting the specific pattern of his movement in the direction of his attention. Hawkins, she realized. He's catching Hawkins' scent. The sheriff must be nearby. Wells immediately activated his radio, ordering a security sweep of the building and surrounding area. How certain are you? He asked Kate. Shadow worked directly with Hawkins during training exercises on our ranch. She explained. He knows his scent profile. If he's alerting, Hawkins is within his detection range, likely within the building or immediate vicinity. David nodded confirmation. Shadow's detection radius for known individuals is approximately half a mile under optimal conditions, less in urban environments with competing scents. The parking garage, Wells concluded, already moving toward the door. It's connected to this building by a secure elevator. If Hawkins has access credentials from his law enforcement position, the implications galvanize them into immediate action. Wells ordered the building locked down while dispatching tactical teams to secure all entry points. David, Kate, and Callahan moved with practiced coordination, Shadow leading them toward the source of the scent he had detected. If Hawkins is here, he's not alone, David warned as they descended to the parking level, following the dog's lead. He would need support to approach a federal building under these circumstances. Unless he's desperate, Callahan countered. Men facing certain death make irrational choices. Shadow's pace increased as they entered the dim expanse of the parking garage, his focus narrowing to a specific section near the emergency exit. Kate moved with tactical precision, weapon ready as they approached a cluster of vehicles that provided potential cover. The confrontation, when it came, was both sudden and anticlimactic. Sheriff Bill Hawkins emerged from behind a concrete pillar, hands raised, face haggard with exhaustion and fear. No weapon visible, no backup in evidence, just a man who had run out of options and chosen the least bad alternative. "Don't shoot," he called, voice unsteady. "I'm surrendering myself to federal custody." Kate maintained her aim, unwilling to trust the man who had threatened her life and conspired in the destruction of her home. "On your knees," she ordered. "Hands behind your head." Hawkins complied, dropping awkwardly to the concrete floor. "Morrison's people are coming for me," he said urgently. "I intercepted communications. They have a cleaner team en route to San Antonio. ETA less than 2 hours." Wells and his agents secured Hawkins, conducting a thorough search that revealed no weapons but did turn up a thumb drive concealed in his boot. "Insurance policy," Hawkins explained as it was confiscated. "My own records of the operation, including direct communications from Morrison." "Why come here?" David asked, studying the man who had betrayed his oath as an officer of the law. "Why not run while you still could?" Hawkins looked up, recognition and shock registering as he processed David's identity. "You're alive," he breathed, then gave a bitter laugh. "Of course you are. Morrison was always too clever for his own good." "Answer the question," Kate pressed, her voice hard with controlled anger. "Because running was a death sentence," Hawkins replied simply. "Morrison's network is too extensive, the cartel too untrustworthy. At least in federal custody, I have a chance at a deal. Witness protection." His gaze shifted to Wells. "That is on the table, isn't it? Exchange for everything I know." Wells maintained professional neutrality. "That's for prosecutors to determine based on the value of your cooperation and the extent of your crimes." As Hawkins was escorted to a secure holding area, Kate found herself standing beside David in Shadow, watching the man who had been part of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed their lives. The anger remained, but it was tempered now by the awareness that justice was unfolding not through violence or vengeance, but through the system David had fought to protect. "It's not over," David said quietly, reading her thoughts as he had always been able to do. "Morrison is still out there. His network is damaged, but not destroyed." "But we've exposed them," Kate replied, her hand finding his. "Together, just like we'll face whatever comes next." Shadow pressed against their legs, completing the circle of their small family, united again after years of separation and danger. They stood ready to face the final challenges of bringing Morrison to justice and reclaiming their future from those who had tried to steal it. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with potential dangers and complications. But as David had inscribed in his wedding ring, what stands in the way becomes the way. The obstacles they had faced had not defeated them, but had instead forged them into something stronger, more resilient, more determined to fight for what mattered. Together, they would finish what David had started not just for themselves, but for all those who depended on the integrity of systems too easily corrupted by power and greed. It was a mission worthy of the sacrifices they had already made, and those that might still lie ahead. For now, in this moment of reunion and renewed purpose, it was enough to stand together Kate, David, and Shadow 3 warriors bound by loyalty, love, and an unshakable commitment to justice. The dawn breaks over a Texas ranch reborn from ashes, where cartel fire once consumed everything. New foundations rise stronger, more vigilant than before. Kate and David Harlo stand on their porch, Shadow at their side, watching the sun paint gold across land that nearly cost them everything. Some wounds don't fully heal. David's limp from his captivity. The nightmares that still wake them both. The knowledge that men with power can corrupt even the most sacred institutions. But some bonds grow stronger through fire, a marriage tested by death and resurrection. A soldier's oath that transcends official duty. A combat dog's unwavering loyalty when all else crumbled. Justice came, not in a blaze of gunfire as the border often demands, but through the stubborn persistence of truth against those who would bury it. General Morrison faces his reckoning behind federal walls. Sheriff Hawkins trades freedom for testimony. The cartel's border corridor lies exposed and broken. Yet in quiet moments, when the Texas wind carries whispers across the fence line, Kate still reaches for her weapon. David still scans the horizon, and Shadow's ears still prick at distant sounds. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, especially for those who've seen how quickly it can burn. What remains when everything is taken from you? Only what no fire can touch: the courage to stand and fight when the world tells you to kneel.